Hello and welcome to another episode of the Reverse Mentor Lab,
where we engage with thinkers from around the world to explore how leaders of today can learn from leaders of tomorrow.
You're back with your hosts. I'm Joshua.
And I'm Jens. Today's topic, we dive deeper into if culture really eats strategy for breakfast. Enjoy the episode.
Hey Jens, good to be back on another virtual recording with you in this new fancy virtual world. How are you doing?
Hello. Yeah, fancy world, and I'm fancy dressed all in red today.
Yeah, it must be a special occasion. I'm just I'm a bit of a color conflicting here. For those that are watching the video, I've got a green hat and a white t-shirt on. Meanwhile, Jens is looking very professional in his red outfit.
Yeah, not really. It doesn't really fit to the rest of the colors, but if we go back to the self-confidence episode, anyone who hasn't listened to that, you should go back. It's like, yeah, you can wear whatever you want if you're self-confident. My wife always say, don't wear the shit red stuff. It looks ugly. That's why I'm wearing it. So that's the occasion and the reason for the people who are watching this on YouTube or wherever.
Yeah, well, that's it. Jens in true fashion is doing something a bit different, and that's the way that he innovates and the way that he likes to prototype things. And so that sort of leads into the discussion. And Jens, you've already introduced it around the question of, does culture really eat strategy for breakfast? So maybe to ask you, where did you start your thinking with this?
Way back. I mean, of course, I always now link it to back to business. I've seen it consistently since. I started my career on construction site in 1997. That's quite a long time ago. So it's always culture eats strategy for breakfast, for me at least, because it's always the people who play the role. It's always the people. And there's always this saying, when the manager is leaving the room, whatever the people are doing, that's culture. Culture is visible when the manager leaves the room. And I just truly believe that you can have the best strategy on paper and want to implement something. If the people are not willing to do that, and if the people are not living it, it's not going to happen in the way you think it will. Just as a base start for us, from my perspective. What about you?
Yeah, super interesting around the way that you framed that, Jens. So I'll share from my perspective, and then I'll just maybe throw a spanner in the works here. So where I started my thinking for this was around going back to the sporting days that I had, and thinking about some of the opportunities that I had to lead teams and to be in a leadership position from a very young age, and thinking about how you sort of brought people along for that journey. What were the sort of team talks that you gave before? How did you give them? What did they encourage people to do? Did people identify with what you were trying to say? Did it make them play better? Did it make you play better? All of those types of questions. At a young age, you're more just really around exciting people, or at least that was in my head. I was really trying to get people excited about what they could do. But reflecting on that now, it's sort of you were creating a culture inside of that team. You're really working to create an environment where people could contribute, could do their best work, could have a bit of fun inside of that space. And I think, that's where I really started my thinking. And then a more recent example could be around opportunities that I've had to engage inside of a business setting. And I think inside of those settings where the culture sort of was right, and by was right, I mean was empowering, allowed people to do their best work, you often saw that those teams performed better than those around them. And that could even be as simple as, just allowing people to share their views, or asking people to share their views, rather than being dictatorial in terms of how you're going about things. So those are two examples from my side. But the spanner that I wanted to throw in the works here was the reason that we'd framed in the question was, does culture really eat strategy for breakfast? Is it only strategy that is eating? And what I mean by that is, so often when we think about business is that we think about culture and strategy as two things. But is it maybe more broadly just around a way of working, which is your culture, which then directs your business, which then directs your strategy? why do we sort of think of these things in polarized views, if we can use that term?
Yeah, that's a great way of opening up, because I agree. It's like the culture for me, if we just go into a little bit definition, and that's not like in the way you would define it properly. I mean, it's just my interpretation of it. If we look into my definition of culture or my interpretation of it, is culture for me is the way people behave in a group. And it's the unwritten rules, like how do people interact in a group setting, when there's no one pushing into any of or the other direction. So it's just the behavior of the group if there's nothing else. And of course, that's then always exposed when you put pressure on a team, when you get pressure from the outside, then the culture is very much exposed. So if we just start with that setting, strategy for me is a directional perspective where you say, we're in a point of time right now, we have a problem, we have a setting, we have something we want to change, and then you put a strategy, kind of a plan together where you say, we want to go from here to there. And what is quite interesting, if you just look at these two definitions, my personal definitions, is if you merge them, then you will be successful. If the people and the culture, together with the strategy in mind, where the people are willing to go as hard as possible and as deep as possible, as passionate as possible to achieve that, what was set out in the strategy, that will be successful. And that then we will go later into how you do that. But that's for me just the base where I agree of that is kind of merged, and it should be merged. It's not opposite. I just see it in businesses all around the world that specifically the culture, the people part is often missed out when you develop a strategy. There comes the big, gigantic consultants into the boardroom and telling you what you need to do. You need to cut so much cost. You need to do this. You need to do that. You need to do this. And the whole people part is 80% of the times forgotten. And I've seen it the last 20-something years. But enough from my rumbling. What about you?
So I'm going to use just an example to sort of build off some of the things that you put down, Jens. And the immediate example that springs to mind in my head is around Apple, and sort of the transition and the strategy and the culture that was developed inside two Apples, let's say. So you had an Apple, Steve Jobs, when he sort of founded Apple, and how did he go about creating that environment? Then when he left, the culture changed. And it wasn't really until Steve came back inside of that space. And the reason I'm using this example is because I think a lot of people around the world, regardless of your geography or your culture or your language, will know who Apple is. And when Steve came back, is that the culture changed, and the company was able to take a significant step up and become arguably the company that it is today. And if you think about the way that he designed his thinking and it designed the company, you'll see that in California, and the reason I'm using this example is also because we're living in a global pandemic now, is inside of the Apple headquarters, he designed it to incorporate spontaneous interactions. And that really highlights and builds off, Jens, what you're saying around the culture inside of things and how people are really important inside of driving the strategy and driving the business forward. And I think that that's a significant space that you need to think about inside of this digital environment, is how do you design for those spontaneous interactions? To meet a person in a corridor that might have nothing to do with your day-to-day operations, but you can ask them a specific question or get a specific idea, which then may influence the way that you take a decision inside of your immediate operations or inside of your immediate responsibility inside of your business. And I think that sort of almost like, I'll use a broad term, cross-pollination with ideas, with people, can significantly influence the culture, can strengthen it, and can then lead to a far greater and stronger business dynamic, which can then be extremely adaptable rather than being responsive to the way that we think about navigating this changing world.
Yeah. And it's so important. Like you said, we're now in a time from a history perspective where it's important that you adjust, where you maybe have had a strategy yesterday or the last 25, 30, 70, 100 years, and it's not working anymore. So that means you have a culture, you have established a culture, or if you are a long-term business, or if you have established a culture and need to change the strategy on the spot, and the culture is not fitting to be able to change, you have a problem. And that's what we're facing in a lot of organizations right now. That's why I think very much right now, this is so important to talk about these things. And the recording of this in the mid of 2021, where we still don't know what's going to happen with the pandemic and what effects will happen after that in a business landscape or economical landscape, societal landscape, and so on. It's still huge. That's why it is, for me, very much important to understand, how do you work with both? How do you establish a culture? How do you establish a strategy that is working with the culture and it's not one eating the other? So let's dive a little bit into the how.
Yeah, so if you dive a little bit into the how, and that's a great segue that you used about not one necessarily eating the other, but working in almost like a symbiotic relationship. So question that pops into my mind when thinking about this is, how can your culture inform your strategy rather than your strategy informing your culture? And that just means that in sort of dealing with the shifting world, what you need to adapt, how you need to adapt, if your culture is strong, that means then your strategy can be adapted and refined relatively quickly, because then you can gather, and the people inside of the business or your team will start to trust your decisions, and they'll also feel comfortable contributing to that strategy going forward. And I think that that's a big thing, and it ties to a number of other, touch points that we've discussed inside of the Reverse Mentor Lab. But that's really something that where I sort of start my foundational thinking about that going forward. Another area, Jens, is to think about, what does it mean to have a good culture? And I think, we can say it goes back to sort of thinking about culture and strategy in these polar environments. But what does it actually mean to have a good culture, as opposed to what does it mean to have a good strategy? And so often, people will say, this business or this team did well because they had a great strategy. In my mind, elements of that are true. But what does it really come down to? Who's doing the actual work? It's the culture that's doing the so-called heavy lifting inside of that, and is so-called enabling that strategy to be played out. Because you could have the best strategy in the world, if you don't have the culture to support it, then all of a sudden, who's going to do the work? There's only so much work that one person can do inside of a team, inside of a business, and even with yourself. You can't do everything by yourself. And that's where I think this importance of strategy really comes into it. And I almost think about it like an ecosystem, a symbiotic relationship where they inform one another, but really is being driven by the cultural side of things.
Love that framing. We need to clip that, by the way. I so agree. And if we dive deeper into, my pen just dropped, not the mic dropped, the pen dropped. If we dive deeper into the how, establishing and you scratched it already, establishing a strategy for me in today's time is with the people, inside of your business. We're kind of consultant and coaches helping companies, the two of us. I think that the time is over that you take in a big consulting company which is writing your strategy. You need to have someone, if you're not comfortable in doing that yourself, which a lot of businesses are, but don't want to, let's say it in a nice way, they are looking for someone they can blame. So if the times are over that you take someone in and who is doing it for you, you need to have someone, if you want to have someone external who is guiding you, who is helping you to do that. But literally, the work needs to be done inside the business. You need to bring people on board from your business, people from your different teams with different perspectives. And yes, for everyone in business, it takes more time than having an external one writing it for you. But you build culture through doing that. The people writing the strategy or building the strategy, the pieces of the strategy, building their baby. And if you do that with people, they're 100% behind what they're doing. And that means they will make it happen. So the culture will work hand in hand with the strategy you develop. And I think that's so often neglected. I see it every time in businesses that it's like, hey, take this big consultancy in because they have done it 20,000 times, and they will manage it. And when I'm going to the board, into the boardroom, to the supervisory board, they will say yes to it because it just comes from that consultancy. The time is over. It's so over. Still, a lot of companies don't do that. So big shift is needed to get the people on board, because what I've seen as an outcome of doing that, there's a lot of money spent, and that doesn't really matter. The most part is there's a strategy written, a strategy developed that is supposed to be implemented by the people inside the business, and the people inside the business haven't been part of that. That means they're working against it from day one. Maybe not 100%, but they're not committed. So the culture and the strategy is not working against each other, and that's where, from my point of view, comes the culture eats strategy for breakfast, because the strategy is not going to be successful as planned, because the culture is eating it up. It's not working with it. So that's just, how do you establish a strategic perspective from my end? What do you think?
So I'm gonna hijack two words from your world here, to kick off my thinking around it, and they are deconstruct and accelerate. And I think super words that you use, Jens, and you use them quite regularly, and you've got a great framework for exactly doing just that. But if you think about, when you go about a product market fit, for example, you go about investigating how to go about tackling a specific problem, you need to deconstruct it. And I think that that's something that needs to happen inside organizations. How do you go about establishing a culture? You need to really deconstruct it. And inside deconstructing it, you'll find elements that can then help to accelerate that going forward. And that sort of links back to what I was saying around, strategy and culture informing the strategy. How do you go about doing just that? And if you think about that from a bigger perspective, how do you then bring about different generations into doing just that? And that's where we think about reverse mentorship, to helping you to unlock that deconstruction and potentially even that acceleration, because one, you are allowing different people to learn from one another, you're bringing different views, you're creating a melting pot of ideas, ideation, different perspectives, etc. But you're also doing it inside of a sense and in a space, like you mentioned, and that's internal. And that's not to say that, big consulting companies can't add value into that space. But what I'm really saying is, how can you do the hard work internally? If you do that hard work internally, and if you really identify those points that you need to deconstruct, maybe you don't have the right person in the right position, for example, is that derailing your culture, which in a sense is not allowing you to achieve your strategic goals? Or do you potentially have a person who's been in the company for too long and is seeing things in the old way of doing things? Because in other discussions, we've also discussed how culture evolves over time. You may have a starting culture and a culture that develops. How can that be a disruption, again, to achieving your strategy? And that sort of brings my mind back in terms of saying, inside of business, let's not think about culture eating strategy for breakfast. It's almost like saying, how do you think about them as two things that inform one another? And if you take a step back and you simplify it, they really do. And I think it's just making us more conscious of how actually closely knit those two things are, to allow your business to progress and to allow you to do your best work as an individual as well.
Yeah. I would like to double click on the culture development or the culture creation part, specifically linking it to reverse mentorship, like what we are about. I mean, for me, there are always two parts of a culture. There's the invisible part and there's the visible part. If we go a level deeper, it's inside the invisible part, it's the unwritten rules. It's like the needs, dreams, and desires of the people inside of that group, ecosystem, company. And if they're met or unmet, you will then they will express that in the visible way. So that's for me the underlying part. If you then take the experienced thinkers and the young thinkers into the mix, which we are all about, so like, how do you make the invisible visible? How do you work with different perspectives and different understanding and different cultural norms as well, from the way you grow up, from the way you see the business, from the way you interact with the world, into something that's a cohesive group, into something where different perspectives are forming a new culture. And I think that's an opportunity for a lot of businesses out there. It's not focusing only on the strategy, like you said, is enabling this through the reverse mentors thinking, where it's about, hey, you bring different generations together. So if you develop a strategy, you should have the experienced thinkers and the young thinkers developing the strategy, not either or. You could say, hey, it's a strategy. Let's say you develop a new digital strategy, whatever. Hey, these old dudes, they have no idea about that. I think it's about taking the youngsters and the old dudes.
So just double clicking on that, Jens, and what you're saying around, not either or, because the older generation and the experienced thinkers have a experienced view and a different worldview to the younger generation.
Exactly.
So the experienced thinkers have a different way of operating, and that way of operating allows them to bring different points of view together to then decide and to make the best strategic steps going forward. But if they don't have access to that information, how are they going to make the best strategic steps going forward? And that, for me, is where you really come down to sort of a culture in terms of allowing young thinkers to be in the room, but also to feel like they can contribute to develop a better strategy and a stronger, more sound strategy for a business going forward.
Yeah, and it's the engagement between each other that's what's going to make the difference. Because the culture is not, hey, we do a meeting and there are different people in the room and then you form a culture. It takes time. I mean, if you take an organization, let's say, take a small organization, even with 50 people, or fairly small organization with 50 people, even that takes time to get a culture of, hey, let's have a look and let's develop a new strategy. And it's not for me, it's not about the purpose of building a culture. For me, the purpose is the business. Is the why is this business existing? And then we leverage the opportunity of building a culture based on creating a strategic focus for that business. So the culture is a mechanism that helps you to do that. And it takes time. But the engagement between each other, and it's not just always the formal setting, it's the coffee talks, the evening dinners, the beer evenings, whatever you do in your culture, that makes the difference. And I just have seen it for myself in the different business settings the business decisions and the engagement happens when the official part is over. It's in conferences, it's in business meetings, I was in global meetings for the total company, which was the top 250 leaders of a very, very big company where I was working in. The real connection happens in the evening when you go on the dance floor, when you go having a drink at the bar. That's where the culture is built. It's not about, hey, this is the official formal meeting and you have to engage with each other in a forced setting. And how do you design that is for me the crucial part in a long-term perspective.
Yeah, I guess it's that's sort of the secret sauce that the companies look for in terms of how they can unlock the top talent as well that they recruit inside of their business and what that means going forward. And I think, we're really talking about the how here, Jens, and one of the biggest things that I've learned, and again, this is very organizational and it's quite a subjective view that I'll bring to this, is really just about saying allowing people to get on and do the work. So it's in terms of, and we've again touched on this in different circles, but it's around trusting the person to do the work, giving them the right tools that they need to do the work, and also letting them know that you're there if they need the support. And I think that overall, what does that mean in terms of developing a culture? If you can then create that environment where you are doing the work and you're getting on and you asking for feedback, but you're also trusting your own judgment, trusting your own thinking, and then you're forming these deeper relationship and other types of connections or whether you're on the dance floor or having a drink on a Friday night, or what does that mean? If you can get that mix right, you can then significantly move a business's strategy forward because you've got everyone swimming in the right direction.
Yeah.
And I think it's that deeper level of understanding. And, to go back to what we said earlier, it's not just culture eating strategy for breakfast. It's walking that same road together, which is super cool and exciting. And I think, what you mentioned is a lot of big consulting firms, management consultants will be brought in to do this job and to sort of say, okay, well, they've worked with another, Fortune 500 company, they can come and do it for us. But it's actually the heavy lifting and the internal work that needs to be done to allow that growth to happen from a cultural perspective.
Yeah, agree. Let's move us into the last part of our one-on-one podcast, where we, as usual, put a challenge out. So what challenge are we putting out this time, Joshua?
So I think we're going to do it in two parts. So we're first going to say is how can you work to identify your biggest barriers to creating a thriving culture? And the second is then maybe a personal piece of inspiration from Jens and I in that space. So seeing that I put Jens on the spot last time, I'll put myself on the spot this time. And I'll say in terms of identifying your biggest barrier, one of the key elements to ask around that from a cultural perspective is, do you have the right people in the right positions? And I've been in situations where they're great people and they're fit for that specific company, but their tool set or their skill set doesn't fit the position that they need, that they're in inside of that business. So rather than thinking about, moving them out of the business, firing them in simple terms, how can you incorporate them in a different role inside of their business? And you'll be amazed if you just think about that in a slightly different way, the level of work or the level of inspiration that you can unlock for that person by empowering them in a different role, rather than saying they're the cause of the problem. It may just be the role and the environment that they're in inside of the business, which is something to think about from a cultural perspective. Then in terms of inspiration, is that I would encourage people, when you're thinking about culture, to not only think about it in isolation to the rest of what is going on in the business. So often you've got a cultural team or, a team that is an internal comms team, to use an overused term inside of a big corporation. They're responsible for getting everyone excited, hyping everyone up. Maybe all that's needed is that the CEO needs to share a bit more of the strategy of the business, the overall vision of the business, and how can you potentially inspire some young people to stay with your business going forward because they identify with the overall vision. So it's, instead of thinking about things in isolation, think about culture, strategy, and business all incorporated, rather than in these silos that we've maybe been taught to think about from a textbook perspective.
Yeah, great challenge. So for me, the biggest barrier, I'm too much agreeing with you. That's not good. We should disagree. But I agree. The biggest barrier is, I go back to mindset. Like I often go, the because you need to have an understanding of the leadership that you need to start changing the culture, and that's the first thing. And again, not as from a perspective of, hey, culture is the means to an end. It's more about, it's an opportunity to use it in shifting the strategic perspective of your business. So it's the mindset of the leaders who are willing to as well step down, like you said, identifying themselves. Am I the right person to take this business forward? Yes or no? And not about how do I keep the power position I have, the money I have, all of that, like egoistic perspective. So doing this as a group of leaders or as the leader is a key barrier to understand. Then from an inspirational perspective, to level up your culture is, I'm a big friend of designing it. And that of course comes from my innovative roots, is I have an understanding of what would be the culture you would love to see. If you just start writing that down, you're the owner of or the management team of your business, write down what culture would enhance your strategic outcomes of your business? What would be the dream culture? And if that dream culture is different to what you have today, then is how do you get there? That's again, how do you build the strategy? But it's really of understanding that, writing it down, and then looking into how can we get towards the future perspective in a way that we use and utilize the whole workforce and the whole employee structure, and if needed, external support to make it happen. That's for me the challenge I would like to everyone who is working in a business setting. You don't need to be the leader or in the management team of the business. You can do that for yourself. What is the culture that will bring your organization, the company you work in, forward? And if that is different than the culture you see and feel right now, how do you get to the future culture? Have a conversation. If you're not in a management position, have a conversation with your leaders, have a conversation with your managers and discuss that. If you are in a management position, have a conversation with your teams, have a conversation with your employees on what they feel, what they understand. And that's the first step going towards building a new culture and utilizing culture as a powerful tool and opportunity for your business.
Most definitely. And I think we've had a wide-ranging discussion here, and it's been interesting to see both of our views, and I'm sure there are many others out there around answering the question of, does culture really eat strategy for breakfast? And the first time you see that question posed, you may think, hell yes. But take a step deeper and understand, what is it actually being asked and how are you going about answering that inside of your business? And Jens, I love the challenge that you laid up there. So thanks again for your time. Thanks to everyone who's made it this far in the episode. And it's super great to have you on this journey with us. And we look forward to catching you in the next episode. Keep well, Jens.
Thank you, Joshua. Looking forward.
Thanks for listening and joining us on the journey that is the Reverse Mentor Lab. If anything fascinated you in the discussion that we had today, you're welcome to set up a 15-minute coffee chat with us. Our emails are in the show notes, and you can also connect with us on our website, thexyzplayground.com.